Let's begin by discussing some definitions and some simple examples. So we call the square root of -1 I, which is called the imaginary unit. And we can use the imaginary unit and properties of square roots to simplify some expressions involving square roots of negative numbers. So for example, if you had, let's say, the square root of 4. And let's do, instead of 4, let's do -4. Now first, let me be clear. As a real number, this does not exist. So there is no real number, the square root of -4. But there is a complex number. We can rewrite -4 under the square root as 4 times -1. And now there is a property of square roots where if you do the square root of two numbers, that's the square root of the first times the square root of the second. So I can write this as square root 4 times square root -1. And thus this would be 2 times I. Now, please be careful. It is true that the square root of two numbers multiplied together is the first number square root times the square root of the second number, but it is not true that if you do the square root of the addition, that's equal to square root A plus square root B. This is not true. So for example, it would be a mistake to say the square root of 4 plus 4 is equal to the square root of 4 plus the square root of 4. That would be an error. So now that we know what the imaginary unit is, we can discuss what a complex number is. A complex number is just a real number plus another real number times the imaginary unit. So for example, 2 plus pi I is a complex number. 7 plus 5i is a complex number. Every real number is a complex number because, for example, the number 2, you can write that as 2 plus 0i. And if there's no real number preceding the I, then we call that a pure imaginary number. So for example, 2 times I is a complex number, but it's also pure imaginary. Now, it is possible to write complex numbers in other ways as well. I won't go into that right now, but you should know that when we write a complex number as a real number plus a real number times I, we say that this is standard form of a complex number. This second part here is called the imaginary part. And this first part here is, you guessed it, it's called the real part. Now that we have some definitions in place, let's discuss a little bit about how we visualize complex numbers.